It's a brand new year, and with it comes a brand new governor in Kansas. We have your handy-dandy guide to what you can expect in Topeka and in Jefferson City. Plus, it's finally official. Get used to calling her Congresswoman Davids, and this is United States Senator Josh Hawley. And the numbers are finally in, and they're not pretty. 135 men, women, and children murdered in our city. Yet why are there more headlines over the holidays over shots fired at Oak Park Mall?
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes, and thank you for deciding that watching this program every week would be one of your top New Year's resolutions. I guarantee we are a healthy and nutritious choice, and here to give you a vigorous but sweat-free workout for your mind are this week's news reviewers, Mr. Up-to-Date on KCOR-FM, star editorial writer Steve Kraske, from 41 Action News, political reporter Stephen Dial, from KCTV5 News, reporter Caroline Sweeney, and from the pages of your Kansas City Star, political analyst, columnist, and editorialist Dave Helling. Now, can you get used to saying Congresswoman Sharice Davids and United States Senator Josh Hawley? It's official this week. They are now on the job.
We're about to step into a situation I don't think that we've seen before, which is a new Congress starting with a government shutdown.
I would just say to the Democrats, it's time to actually do your jobs. It's time to stop politicking. It's time to come to the table and to work to secure the border, get funding for the government, stop playing politics.
Let's start with Congresswoman Davids. We know from her emails that she's already started raising money for her 2020 re-election campaign, but there's 2 years between now and then. Do you have a better sense this week about what kind of Congresswoman Sharice Davids will be now that she's officially on the job in Washington? And Stephen, you spoke to both of them this week.
Yes, and from talking to her, she said priority number one is reopening the government, same as for Josh Hawley. But after that, it's interesting. She told me she wants to focus on making sure, talking about campaign finances, also healthcare. But it's interesting to see a first-term congressperson focusing on campaign finance when we're talking about pre-existing conditions, education, a lot of other things.
But she talked about also being, during the campaign, this bipartisan congresswoman who is going to work across the aisle to get things accomplished. So what is she doing to compromise with President Trump on getting funding for a wall, if that's what she wanted to do, Caroline?
Well, if you want to look at the votes that they took yesterday, she's not doing much compromising if you're looking at the wall discussion, but she is voting not necessarily with the other Congress people in Kansas. She voted yes. Both Estes, Marshall, and Watkins voted no. But I just want to say the fact that she's already fundraising for 2020 shouldn't alarm or worry anyone that she's not focused on this legislative session right now, because it's only 2 years and we know how much trouble it can take to raise money.
Steve.
You know, Nick, I wouldn't expect a whole lot from Congresswoman Sharice Davids, and she is a backbench Democratic lawmaker now, a freshman in a huge body. She will have to find her way, earn her stripes, all of that. You know, she began in the campaign by saying to me on the radio point blank that she wanted a clean sweep when it came to leadership in the U.S. House of Representatives, meaning no more Nancy Pelosi, no more Steny Hoyer. She wanted new faces. What did she end up doing? She voted for Nancy Pelosi to go in. That's a sign to me that perhaps she is going to be sort of a rank-and-file Democratic lawmaker, not a bomb thrower. Don't expect lots of headlines from her in the next couple of years.
Is that the way you view it, Dave?
Exactly the way I view it. With this minor exception, I do think that the Democrats, the Democratic leadership in the House, will look for opportunities to allow Sharice Davids to cast a contrary vote when her vote isn't essential, so that she can go back to the district and say, hey, I voted in a bipartisan way on X, Y, and Z. But when her vote is needed, she will be a Democratic vote. The leadership will insist on it. And that's, I think, exactly what Steve is talking about, that she is, in essence, a Democratic backbencher, and that's what will happen.
What about Josh Hawley? Are we any the wiser as to how Missouri's newest senator will act in Washington, Stephen?
Well, you can see he's already saying everything is the Democrats' fault when it comes to the negotiations that are ongoing with the border wall. He thinks that wall is needed. Sharice Davids told me yesterday she does not think billions of dollars are needed to expand and increase the border wall. Josh Hawley saying that his focus will be, of course, to do what Missouri Missourians want him to do by sending him there. But he says pre-existing conditions is something to be on the lookout for during his first year.
You know, make no mistake here, Josh Hawley will be a Donald Trump rank-and-file Republican lawmaker in the U.S. Senate. Donald Trump elected Josh Hawley to this office, came to the state any number of times. Josh Hawley owes Donald Trump big time after initially questioning the president when he first began his campaign.
Now, speaking of senators, Kansas Senator Pat Roberts announced just before Christmas that he planned to speak with family members and supporters over the holidays about whether he will seek a fifth term in office. The holidays are now over. Did he decide whether he'll run again next year or at 82 decide to call it quits? I should point it out, he has a press conference later this morning. We tape this program on a Friday morning at 10 o'clock so Steve Kraske can do his radio show. What is the thinking at this point in time, Dave?
Well, as you point out, Nick, we don't know for sure, but all of the tea leaves suggest as we tape the show that Pat Roberts is going to call it a career at the end of 2020 and will not run for re-election and will serve the final 2 years. That immediately provokes speculation about who the next Republican candidates might be for that seat. Open seats in Kansas. Open seats for the Senate are rare everywhere in America, but particularly in Kansas. And so you can expect a scramble for that nomination. I'm hearing Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, might come back. Chris Kobach, certainly. Kevin Yoder has some interest. Roger Marshall, the 1st District Congressman, all names that are mentioned as possible Republicans. And then Democrats might show some interest, too. The results in 2018 with Laura Kelly and Sharice Davids might give Democrats some impetus to file for that seat and try to accomplish the impossible by actually winning.
Even though, as we tape this program, we don't know the final result, but one candidate has already declared his intention to run against Roberts. That's the former U.S. Attorney for Kansas, Barry Grissom. Is he just the beginning, then?
Well, like, Dave was just saying, there's already kind of names circulating around who might be interested in this spot. But when you look at Barry Grissom, his name recognition might not be as big as Kevin Yoder or some of these other lifelong politicians we've been hearing already. But his record is going to start speaking for itself. And I think he's going to have a pretty good opportunity when it comes to fundraising here, especially in the metro area. So he may not be the beginning, but he's going to start inching his way that way.
But history is against a Democrat being a senator from Kansas, despite this
mildly.
blue wave that we've seen across the United States.
Boy, is it ever, Nick. Kansas holds the distinction of going the longest of any state in the country without electing a Democrat. It hasn't happened in Kansas since the 1930s.
I would just say don't count out Jeff Collier. I think he will return to public office in some capacity. And the 2018 election factor with Laura Kelly being elected may make a lot of Republicans tell Chris Kobach, don't think about doing it. You couldn't win governor. How can you win statewide?
I'm intrigued by you mentioning Kevin Yoder as a possibility. I mean, he still has a good reputation, by and large, in this whole state of Kansas.
Yeah, I met with him before Christmas to talk about his race and how he is leaving Congress, and he hinted at some interest in a future political career. I'll put it that way. He's still well known in Johnson County, where 1 out of 4 votes are cast. I think that the reaction to his candidacy for the Congress, Nick, was based on Donald Trump and not so much Kevin Yoder. And so,
is that going to be any different, though?
Let me just throw out one other thing. The Yoder family is very well known around Wichita and Hutchinson, so he has sort of that too. I wouldn't count him out. We'll have to see what the field looks like, but my guess is he has some interest. We'll see what happens.
But isn't it going to be the same circumstances next year if he were to run for the United States Senate as he faced in this season, where it was a referendum on Donald Trump in Kansas?
Correct, but in a primary, the math changes, Nick. You have a crowded field. Every candidate who jumps in thinks, hey, maybe I can carve out the 20, 25% that's going to be needed to win in a race like this. Kevin Yoder might do that math. My early frontrunner would be Governor Jeff Collier. I wrote a column about him today. I think he's a very important name to watch.
Caroline.
I think if Kevin Yoder is looking for this move to the Senate, now is the time, because unfortunately it looks like Republicans are going to be battling the Trump effect for years to come. And if you were going to get out early, now would be that time.
They're packing up the boxes at Cedar Crest, the governor's mansion in Topeka. 11 months after he was sworn in, Jeff Collier is on the phone with the moving company that will return him to civilian life, at least for now. In just days, a new governor will take his place. Laura Kelly will be officially sworn in as the 48th governor in the state's history on Monday, January 14th. That's when lawmakers will also gather to launch the 2019 legislative session. Complete this sentence, Dave Helling. New Governor Laura Kelly's biggest challenge is blank.
The Republican legislature does not appear at this point willing to back down in any significant way, and that's going to be an enormous challenge for her as she addresses school finance, which I think will be first, and then some tax reform may come a bit later. The Republicans, I think, A, are more conservative, but B, are quite frustrated with what happened in 2018, frustrated with their nominees, frustrated with the Democrat in the governor's mansion, and they've shown no signs so far of a willingness to back down or to compromise or to reach any agreement with the new Democratic governor. That's been the case before when Kathleen Sebelius first took office, so that's going to be her biggest challenge, to try and overcome that resistance in the legislature.
When we mention the word state house or legislature, even some of our producers yawn when I use those words. So what do we need to know about or expect or watch out for that is of concern to us in this brand new year in Topeka?
Yeah, my fill in the blank was going to be bipartisan efforts on Laura Kelly's part. And I think it's been interesting, the discussion about where these moderate Republicans are going, several of them switching parties. I think that could have actually a backward effect on what they've been trying to do over the last several years. That moderate coalition was really important to reaching across the aisle, but they've switched parties, and that may backfire when it comes to some of these major legislative points.
Just my 2 cents on Governor Kelly, Nick, for your listeners. I mean, don't be fooled by her soft-spoken manner. She is the opposite, the anti-Donald Trump. Deeply invested in policy, very smart, savvy, and she's very, very tough, Nick. She will take control of state government and assert her will. And if any Democrat can make progress here with a bright red legislature, it's Laura Kelly.
Now, by the way, Missouri lawmakers and Governor Mike Parson getting back to work sooner than their colleagues in Kansas. Some lawmakers are already trickling back to Jefferson City ahead of the official start of the session on Wednesday. Stephen Dial, complete this sentence. The biggest challenge on Missouri lawmakers' plates is blank.
The biggest challenge is finding funding, in my opinion, for infrastructure. We have crumbling roads and bridges. The governor and others were banking on this gas tax passing. It did not pass. So where does the money come from to fix something that everyone in the state uses?
I think that's really interesting, because also this morning I hear that there is an effort also among Missouri lawmakers to eliminate property taxes for seniors. And I'm thinking, if they don't have money for things like infrastructure, how are they affording even more property tax cuts?
I was actually thinking post-Greitens style lawmaking. We all know kind of what the legislative feeling was in Jefferson City while Governor Greitens was there. We knew there was a lot of infighting that kind of spilled out publicly several times when you're talking about how happy some of the senators were standing in Governor Greitens' camp. So I think they're going to have to try and figure out how to talk to each other, how to move forward when it comes to finding funding for infrastructure, when they're talking about what they want to do with some of the statewide votes that we saw pass in November.
Absolutely. And while many of us were merrymaking, or perhaps we're on vacation somewhere else over the break, Mike Parson, the governor, saying he wanted to overturn that new law in Missouri that voters just passed, the Clean Missouri bill that redistricts in a different way the legislative districts and changes the nature of gifts and lobbyist and campaign funding to lawmakers. Steve, do you see that happening?
I do not. Not to say that Republicans won't make a really strong attempt here to overturn portions of Clean Missouri. They believe that this new law is going to hurt their cause going forward, cost them seats in the General Assembly. But man, that initiative passed with more than 60% voter approval. Voters have always expressed a huge support for anything that smacks of ethics and improving ethics in Jefferson City. I think Governor Parson, who's a very formidable presence in his own right, would have a big fight on his hands.
But it wasn't that long ago that Missouri voters passed a bill called relating to puppy mills to block that. And it was Mike Parson, as a state senator, who led the charge to overturn that and was very successful. Yeah. Why not here, Dave?
Let me come back to that in a minute. I just want to report that the Star is now reporting that Pat Roberts will retire. So that's breaking news, just came across the phone. So your viewers are now...
Is anybody going to change their viewpoint on that story now that we have that breaking news? was doing this
do what I
program.
can. I think Steve, again, has it right that there will be a reluctance among some members in the legislature to take on Clean Missouri, which, by the way, would have to go back on the ballot in 2020, absent some court challenge. And the political benefits to doing that are slim. But I do think there's overall a frustration with what voters are doing, and that's why the first part of the session may be caught up in all of this. Right to work, minimum wage, petition process, Clean Missouri. Don't look for any progress on transportation or the budget until late in the session, April or perhaps in May.
I was just going to say, the puppy mills and governmental ethics are kind of two completely different things.
Good point.
When we're talking about like what is appropriate for lawmakers to overturn once they get back in session, because Governor Parson, for his part, did come out and say, look, we know that you all voted on this, but sometimes to make our jobs work the way our jobs are supposed to, we can't always do what you voted on statewide. But, you know, a puppy mill ban and governmental ethics just sit in two completely different camps.
A question for you at home. What do you think of these bans that cities are now imposing on disposable straws? Plastic straw bans are going into effect around the country. California recently became the first state to nix plastic straws from restaurant tables. In July, Seattle became the first major city in the nation to bar single-use plastic straws and plastic utensils. Could such bans be heading here? A Missouri lawmaker says absolutely not. State Representative Dan Scholl from Imperial, which is about a 25-minute drive south of St. Louis, has filed legislation prohibiting any Missouri city from banning plastic products. Scholl, by the way, is also director of the Missouri Grocers Association. This wouldn't be the only effort by Missouri lawmakers to block local cities, though, from making their own laws. The state already blocks cities from banning single-use plastic bags. They block cities from passing gun restrictions. What are state lawmakers afraid will happen here, Steve?
Well, again, this is sort of counterintuitive, Nick. Republicans pride themselves on being the less intrusive party, and here they are sending out dictates on what individual restaurants might be able to do. This is sort of a campaign move for this lawmaker, who obviously has a vested interest in seeing that these straws don't get banned.
Steve said exactly what I was going to say. At the beginning of every legislative session, especially in Missouri when they have the ability to pre-file, you're going to see a slew of bills with things like this that probably won't make it past the committee or even to the committee when people just say, no, we don't have time for this. So I think it brings up an interesting discussion, but I don't know if this is going to go anywhere.
Well, with a brand new year comes brand new laws in both our states. The biggest change is in Missouri, where the new voter-approved minimum wage law is now in effect. An Associated Press story catalogs how businesses are already responding to the 75-cent wage hike, which, by the way, is just the first of 5 annual increases that will take the minimum wage to $12 an hour by 2023. Could your 2-egg breakfast with bacon cost you more now? The AP documents a Joplin diner that's reprinted its menus to reflect the 5, 10, or 20 cents added to each item. The owner says the price hikes are necessary to offset an estimated $12,000 more he has to pay his staff. Is this just an isolated story, or can we all expect our burger, burritos, or pizzas to cost a little more starting this week, Stephen?
I think it depends on where you go. This week, probably not, but I've talked to some local business owners, and a lot of them have said, I want to pay my workers more, but something has to give. Either I'm going to increase it on the consumer side, or I'm going to cut my employer side. And so things will change depending on what pockets of the state you're in.
Caroline.
I was out talking to Kansas Cityans about whether or not they'd be willing to pay more so that people can make a livable wage. And I didn't run into anyone who was fervently opposed to raising our burgers, a couple of cents so that people can make more money. But if we're starting to see sweeping changes, especially when it comes to chains versus locally owned restaurants, we may see a divide there.
The minimum wage, Nick, has support from both parties. Republicans see it as rewarding hard work, rewarding initiative. Democrats see it as simply a matter of fair play. I don't think you're going to see any effort to overturn this increase in the minimum wage in Missouri.
Interestingly, the state of Kansas now has one of the lowest minimum wage in the country. Any effort to make any changes on that there?
No, this legislature certainly won't attempt that. The governor might propose it, but keep your eye on Washington, Nick. The new Democratic House is talking about raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. That would probably not get through the Senate or get the president's signature, but an increase of that amount might have an impact on your hamburger or your French fries. The minimum wage increase in Missouri is really absorbable by almost every business, particularly when unemployment is under 4%. You're having to pay that kind of wage to get quality help anyway. I think people in Kansas City will not notice when after now that it's gone into effect.
Well, the official numbers are now in, and they're not pretty. Last year, 135 men, women, and children were murdered in Kansas City. That's actually 16 less than the year before. But is anyone viewing that as a sign of success, Caroline?
You know, I've been out on the streets talking to Kansas Cityans about what this looks like for them, and everyone is still deeply frustrated by the homicide rates in Kansas City. When you're looking at the gun deaths overall in the country, which we did several weeks ago, Kansas City's numbers are not on the average when you're looking. They're slightly lower than the average, but that doesn't matter. That slightly lower isn't helping anyone feel any more safe, any more comfortable, or any happier about how things are going with the police department.
And as we start this brand new year, there is a mayor's race. We have a primary going on in April. How is this working its way, this issue of homicides in that mayor's race? Is it the huge priority, or is it still the airport, tax incentives, affordable housing that are the priorities?
Crime is always going to be in the conversation, I believe, especially in a city as unique as Kansas City. I will say having fewer homicides is a step forward, but I talked to some council members, some people with the police department, and they're more concerned with the number of young people ages 17 to 24 is increasing 30% for 2018 that were killed. Last year it was almost 32%. So that number is going up, and that is the concern.
Yeah, I wrote a column this week about what the mayoral candidates might want to focus on in the primary election, which, by the way, is in less than 90 days. So the focus of voters is clearly going to turn to that race. And I suggested Phil Glenn might take crime as an issue. I think the first candidate who really suggests he or she has a plan to address violent crime could really rise in the voters' eyes quickly. I know affordable housing is an issue, wages, development, economic development incentives, but that feels
If it was such a
crowded.
winner, though, why aren't they saying
That's
okay.
an interesting question as to why it hasn't been.
Just a very quick plug. On the pages of your Kansas City Star Sunday, Nick, we asked community leaders, what's the one thing Kansas City has to do now to address violence in Kansas City? Those answers in Sunday's newspaper.
Getting more headlines over the holiday, though, than those final homicide statistics was the shutdown of Oak Park Mall after a second round of shootings in as many months. Some now threatening to abandon the mall altogether over safety worries. Is that, though, an isolated view, or is this having a bigger impact on shoppers? Caroline?
I don't think situations like this are going to have as big of an impact as, let's say, online shopping for the health of the mall in the future. But Oak Park Mall has continually said they have security there. You can see the security going around. This may just be an isolated situation. But I think when people start thinking about where they're going to go in Kansas City, I don't think Oak Park Mall is kind of the hangout spot that it used to be.
With your journalism cap on as a professor at UMKC, Steve, why is it, though, that a story like Oak Park Mall gets more headlines than what are actually much more greater deaths that we see in the urban core of our community?
Well, it happens in a part of the community where these things aren't normally associated. They don't normally happen there, Nick, and so anything unusual will attract the attention of journalists. You know, the thing that I worry about for the Country Club Plaza, for the Oak Park Mall, these are isolated incidents, sure, but if there's one or two more in the months to come, then you got a big problem.
Yeah.
Yes, well, because I was going to say, you know, when it first happened, the first shooting at Oak Park Mall happened, everyone said, oh, it's an isolated incident, they have security, then it happens again. So I think, just like Steve said, if it continues to happen, then there's a bigger conversation that needs to be had as to, yes, there is crime in the urban core of the city, but now it's spilling out to other areas.
When we think about the biggest issues happening in Kansas City, one of the most interesting for many people, of course, is the Chiefs. Another is the federal shutdown, which continues to be one of the bigger stories of our week. Unlike previous shutdowns, about 75% of the federal government is unaffected. They are already funded. But what about the 25% that isn't? How does that affect us right here? The Truman Presidential Museum in Independence is shut down. What other impact is there, if any, on metro area residents?
Well, there will, as the shutdown continues, agencies will run out of money beyond just libraries and parks. For example, the Environmental Protection Agency has a regional headquarters in Lenexa, and the EPA is now looking at furloughs and some other shutdown effect. So it will grow. The biggest employer in Kansas City is the federal government. And so the inability of the Congress and the president to reach an agreement on this is going to bite increasingly. Now, does it really impact Kansas City's economy? Not today, but if it's still going on, say, February 2nd, then it will be a problem here and across the country, not only for those workers, but for the broader economy.
There are around 28,000 federal workers, by the way, here in the metro, around 5,000 affected. That's about 17%. But won't all these employees be paid once the shutdown is over, Steve?
Yes, at least that's been the practice of past Congresses to make up this money. And in terms of fairness, it'd be the only justifiable thing to do, I think.
I see also this week stories about Sprint T-Mobile deal also being put on pause because of the Federal Communications Commission not being able to work. And also there was a talk about KCI Airport also being stalled because of funding issues there and how that might be reviewed.
Yeah, that is less, I think the airport is less of an issue. It's a 4-year project. Another hiccup here won't make a big difference, but the Sprint T-Mobile merger is an important thing. They'll catch up on that too. It's foolishness, of course, Nick, that the government is not open for business. But I must say, you heard Josh Hawley earlier in this program. You've heard Sharice Davids. The path to a compromise doesn't appear clear to me today.
And that is our week in review. Our thanks to our news reviewers from 41 Action News, Stephen Dial, and from the Kansas City Star, Dave Helling, keeping you up to date weekdays at 11 on KCUR-FM, the Kansas City Star's Steve Kraske, and from the studios of KCTV5 News, Caroline Sweeney. For another perspective on the Metro's news, watch Mike Shannon for Ruckus Sunday morning at 11:30, right after the rebroadcast of this program. I'm Nick Haynes from all of us here at KCPT. Thanks for spending part of your brand new year with us.